caused some catastrophic injuries to some of the Marines that were in there, but the concussion and the blast somehow made even the rounds on their vests start detonating. And so as they're sitting next to each other, it's shooting each other from their vest. Nobody sits there and, no one sits there and says, hey, sir, it's okay, I got this, right? Like, you're the senior man on the ground. The number one thing that Marines will go to the gates of hell and back for you if they feel confident that you have a plan to take care of them. So as the senior man on the ground, when that happens, everybody's sitting there and they look at you. Okay, what are you going to do?
This episode is sponsored by Let's Get Checked. Let's Get Checked is a home health test program that lets you get health-related tests like hormone wellness, men's health, and way more completed in the comfort of your own home. In a nutshell, Let's Get Checked mails you a small, sleek test kit where you provide a sample like blood or saliva at your house, no lab visit required, and then you mail it right back to them for evaluation. So my wife and I used a few different test kits. I ordered the male hormone kit. My wife got the progesterone and cortisol tests just to see where we stood on these. Just 2 days after sending our kit back, physician reviewed the results, and a member of their medical staff called me to review the information. It was all confidential, no driving to the lab, and no inconvenience. All my hormones look good, and that's just part of my workout regimen to make sure I'm on the right track. You can get 25% off and get your own at-home test kit while helping Combat Story continue to grow by using the link trylgc.com/combat story. That's Tango Romeo Yankee Lima Golf Charlie.com/combat story. Or you can just go to letsgetchecked.com and use the coupon code combat story and you get 25% off. Thanks. And now back to the show. Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we hear the combat story of Joe McNamara, a former Marine Corps officer who experienced a unique kind of violence from his time on campus at Virginia Tech during the horrific 2007 shooting to leading Marines in combat in Afghanistan. After leaving the service, Joe founded a leadership development company called Impact USA that trained both elite athletes and private sector leaders. Impact was recently acquired by Mike Sarraille's Talent War Group, where Joe is now a partner and chief revenue officer. Many will recall a fantastic interview with Mike, episode 70, the former enlisted Marine who went on to Force Recon, served as an officer in the SEALs, and eventually Naval Special Warfare Development Group, or DEV Group. The fact that someone like Mike, who went through that crucible of leadership experiences, went on to acquire Impact says a lot about what Joe does to develop leaders. This episode dives between combat experiences and the leadership lessons we can apply to our lives, from the foxhole to athletics to the office. In fact, Joe answers two questions I've always had. How do you create a sense of shared adversity in a corporate setting? And how do you find time to train corporate leaders without taking them off operations for a full 6 to 12 months the way the military does? I hope you enjoy this combat story with a battle-hardened Marine Corps officer and some of the tangible leadership lessons we can all apply from his experiences as much as I did. Yo, thanks for taking the time to share your story with us.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm excited to be here and kind of talk through this today.
So I think a huge component of what we're going to talk about will end up being leadership. Certainly, and I'm just going to get it out here early so that the Army people can take shots at me, but I don't know if anybody makes leaders better than the Marine Corps. I've heard it from many people on this podcast, and just having been around different Marines, you see it. But I'm curious if your interest in leadership from the Corps out into Impact and Talent War Group, if that was something that came about as you were younger. Like, were you hungry for leadership? Were you seeking out leadership positions when you were in like high school or growing up, or did that come later?
Sure, that's a good question. I think that it wasn't intentionally sought out. It was things that had naturally come through athletics, right? So I played every sport I could think of, and I think naturally had some of those attributes of just kind of rolling through that would be some type of leader or play a role on the teams that I was a part of. And so I think mostly it had come through that athletic side where you're always doing some type of influencing on a team that you were at is where, from the younger perspective, shaped some of the leadership journey there.
And then growing up, can you give us some flavor about where you were and the type of family you were in, like military background? Because I know you got a lot of military coming. So was it kind of bred into you, or did you find it your own way?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was bred into me. I grew up by Notre Dame in a little town called Elkhart, Indiana, so up north there. And the interest in the military, my father had served in the Air Force. I think like doing something in the dental world, in that. So not an influence on the Marine side of me, right? But we had grown up, and I'd gone up to having an interest in military aviation, and we'd go up to Oshkosh every year as a young boy, and so I'd see kind of the military planes, the history of it, and so I liked the history pieces of that. But what kind of led to that, I ended up, through parents' divorce, I ended up going to New Jersey of all places, for high school and going through, and just noticed that, hey, you know what, I'm not going to I'm not going to make a living out of athletics. I need to figure something out with my life. And I didn't really have a very big pull to the military, but it was probably the most mature decision I made as a young man, was really kind of putting some intentional thought of what do I want to do. And I had kind of a drive of looking at some of those things and say, this would be interesting. But I knew very little, unlike some of these people that they know they want to be a Marine or a Navy SEAL or whatever since they were 4. I did not. I can remember what shaped that decision was on a visit to, as I started exploring the military. Quickly, the Naval Academy let me know that I was not what they were interested in. So I had to look at a couple other opportunities, and I was on a visit to, Indiana University, and there was an Army major who I guess ran the ROTC department there or whatnot, and was just giving me an overview of what it is. And he's going on and on about the Army Rangers and all the cool things that they get to do and rappelling out of helicopters. I'm like, this sounds right up my alley. Like, this is cool, right? And so I just asked a simple question. It was an honest question. I didn't really know, and I said, "Hey, can you help me understand the difference between the Army and, the Marine Corps? Like, I've seen posters about the Marine Corps." And he was like, "Sure. If picture the Army as a screwdriver, and they see this problem, and they will systematically take it apart and figure out what's going on, and they'll do some really cool tactics to fix it, and they'll be excited about it." And I was like, that sounds awesome, using the special operation, all this stuff. So I was like, that sounds pretty cool. I was like, what? But he's like, now the Marine Corps is like, imagine that same exact problem, but the Marine Corps is more like a sledgehammer. And they're just going to, without analyzing it, they're just going to obliterate that problem, not really know it, did it, have a heck of a lot of fun while they do that, and then look back and figure out how they're going to fix that. And that was it. I said, cool, thank you. And he was like, so can we get you signed up? I was like, no, I'm going to the Marine Corps.
No.
And that was it.
So it was a bad sales pitch by this guy.
It was, you know what? And I've always kicked myself for not remembering his name, because I'd love to talk to him again. It certainly launched me down a different path, but I'll never forget that story.
That's great, man. That's great. Okay. So at some point you decide you're going to go in, and it sounds like it's your decision after doing a lot of homework. You find your way to Virginia Tech. How did you do that? Why did you choose there?
It was, ironically, I don't remember all of the pieces, but kind of being in New Jersey at that time, is when you're differently up in the Northeast, unless you really go to an Ivy League school or something in the Northeast, it's nothing but much smaller kind of community, or just smaller universities and colleges up in the Northeast. And so it was actually pretty common for people to go away, compared to, some of these states are like Indiana, for example, where it's, hey, you've got Purdue and Indiana University, right? I'm down in South Carolina, you've got Clemson and South Carolina, right? And so we had some of our older, our friends and their brothers, they had gone to Virginia Tech. And when the Naval Academy piece again was a quick rejection for me, I started exploring that option, and that's where I stumbled upon, hey, not only Virginia Tech was a larger, more recognizable school, but hey, the bonus was they have a senior military college inside of that university, and so I started exploring that opportunity, because I wanted more of that type of an experience than your traditional, like, 1 or 2 a day ROTC type thing, right?
Support for Combat Story is brought to you by Manscaped, the best in men's below the waist grooming. And don't worry, we'll keep it PG rated here. Look, Manscaped has probably the best tagline I've ever heard. Their products are precision engineered tools for your family jewels. And pilots love precision engineered tools. Manscaped's Performance Package is the ultimate men's hygiene bundle. You can join over 6 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer for our listeners. It's 20% off and free worldwide shipping with the code Combat Story. That's all one word at manscaped.com. Little known fact is that I've cut my own hair for the past 7 years. I also cut my kids' hair. Because of that, I'm somewhat a connoisseur of razors. I've tried a kit that Manscaped sent to me, and I absolutely would attest to the fact that it's ideal for trimming beard and facial hair, all areas around your neck, and I use it for the area just above and behind my ears as well. Of course, it's also very safe and effective, as a precision engineered tool should be for other areas of the body, if you know what I mean. So you can get 20% off with your Combat Story promo code, tidy things up while supporting the show. With that, back to Combat Story. You had shared just before we started that you were there for a very important, somewhat somber event. But if you could talk through what it was like to be there and share with people what that event was.
Yeah, and actually back up a little bit on that is my timing, right? When I was there, in all of my timing in the Marine Corps, you can call it good or bad. Just the timing from where I was raised by all of the, OIF-1 Marine vets, right? And so there's a ton of pros that come from that. They got real world experience now. They're able to come back and say, hey, all the things that we've been learning, doctrinal things that we took from the Gulf War and whatever we've been teaching, here's what's actually relevant. And so you were able to gather a lot of that information. The downside was this was also a group that understood the severity of our profession. And if you're not incredibly demanding, and we do not demand perfection out of those that are going to lead Marines or take Marines and go fight, it leads to death. And so the training was incredibly difficult at every phase we went, because it had so much real life combat experience backed upon that. And Virginia Tech was that experience for me, is probably two of the most important figures in my life that kind of formed me into the man that I am. It happened at Virginia Tech. And that was our, just luck of the draw, if you will, because they all, and how it rotates, and don't need to bore people with that conversation, but it was kind of atypical at the time, and had a Marine infantry major that came and took over the Marine ROTC unit there at Virginia Tech by name of, he was now Lieutenant Colonel Trent Gibson, who was coming off of Kilo 37's deployment in Iraq, where Corporal Jason Dunham was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions in Iraq. And I use that as an example because that was bred into us, of the character and the selflessness that a man like Jason Dunham had. And he has spoken about it. I believe there's a movie that they're trying to make about him. There's a great book about Jason called The Gift of Valor that I encourage everybody to read. Reading and learning more about Jason and his character and his leadership and his selflessness, you're just a better person for knowing that.
Wow.
And so having that type of the real world experience and that command experience and coming out to us, just to be able to grab a hold of us and pour into us on a daily basis, was incredibly transformative for us. And then his senior enlisted advisor, rarely would they pair up two infantry guys like that together, and it just so happened that's where we got. So we were kind of a hyper aggressive unit, but for that day on, stay on, 3.5 years of just pure mentorship. I've just have not met many people who have been that engaged in not just the life of our unit and in the well-being of our unit, but in my life personally, and invested to sit there and say, we will do everything it takes to make sure you're successful. And so I owe those two a lot. And as we came to that conclusion, what we were talking about was the school shooting at Virginia Tech in 2007. I had such a great experience at school. And it was kind of a somber way to go out on April 16th. So we were right towards the end. We're with inside a month, right, of commissioning and everything that we've worked towards and getting ready to go. We're all well aware of the wars that are happening. And in being in uniform going through, we were standing there. I was probably 400 meters away from the building that this took place on, and we were watching a school that size. Not to be too crass about this, but a school that size, there was a shooting earlier in the morning of like one person, and it's not that that's not a bad thing, but at a school that size, it's also not that unexpected, I guess. Like, that could happen. And so that didn't raise any red flags. But as I was sitting there and I was watching these cars come flying around, right, we overlooked like a drill field, which is in the center of Virginia Tech's campus. And I'm watching kind of these unmarked cars come flying around there. And my buddy, who was one of my best friends, was the senior cadet commander at the time. We were in his room and we were watching this and noticing like it's just odd, right? Like something is off. And at that time, the news started to break, which I have no idea how quickly that was happening. But I can remember talking with him like, this doesn't make sense. Like 22 people killed, and the numbers kept climbing. But like, we're watching this, and I'm like, man, we're not seeing this. And at that point, we started watching individuals start, the iconic photos, right, where they were carrying our classmates out by their hands and their feet like sacks of potatoes. I was like, that's unusual. And that's when we sat there and said, okay, we need to figure out what's going on. And so, just being in uniform all the time, the police were awesome. That, they love us. We had good relationships with them. And so it's not like we were in there doing anything, but they were welcoming our participation to help, crowds and traffic and whatever needed to have happened. But we needed to get accountability for it. And ultimately, there were a lot of heroic actions by not just students, in that time, but even the teachers. And that was, I think, what made it really interesting was, unfortunately, we've seen a string of these in our country from that, but the teachers that were doing some heroic things to allowing our classmates to escape out of there. But then some of the stories of classmates and what they did in the rooms. And so I had some friends that were shot and not killed in that, but certainly went through a pretty tough time. But there was one cadet, Matthew Laporte, who was, I believe he was a sophomore at the time, if my memory serves me. And he was killed on that day. And I tell his story, right, is because those moments come and everybody can sit back and Monday quarterback what they would do when they face that type of fear, or they face that type of an event. And even me as a senior, getting ready to, knowing my path, that, hey, I'm probably going to end up in combat as a Marine here in the next few months or in the next year, what have you. What would I do in that situation? I look back at Matt Laporte as one of those young men who shaped me, because put a plan in place, right? Initiative and boldness, assess the situation, figure something out and try it. And Matt Laporte did that. He got the entire class back in a corner that was not within direct sight of the door. He had a plan that said, hey, when he comes through that door, I'm going to take these 2 desks and I'm just going to rush him. I'm going to throw a desk at him. I'm going to rush him. I'm going to throw another desk, and I'm going to take him on. And he was very, very close. His classmates were back in the corner, and Matt was killed point blank up at the front of the classroom. And I tell his story of not just the courage of that young man, but just the selflessness at that age to sit there and sit, hey, if not me, then who? Like, I will take control of this. And so as the events, as they unfolded, certainly shocking, period. But as it unfolded, he was an Air Force cadet, and the Air Force decided to give him or honor him with a full military honors funeral, to which they sent the Air Force Honor Guard down, and his parents had asked, that's great, but we want the cadets to do it. And that was my first moment of, okay, wow, like this stuff gets real, because of our path and our trajectory. Not just that we lost classmates, we lost a lot of other classmates that weren't in the military, but knowing where, my mindset is already going towards the next 1 or 2 or 3 years. What are we going to face, right? What's happening? didn't think I was going to have to do that in school. And so here I am at 20, 21 years old, and just the position that I held, had to lead a team to bury, one of our teammates. Really before, you're you're really expecting that on the battlefield. You're not expecting that at school. And so I can remember, I just believe, the Lord's going to work things in mysterious ways. Not sure why, a lot of tragedy out of that, but I can tell you, like, psychologically for me, I would sit there and say that moment I look back is, now that I can look back on my experiences, that hardened me emotionally, for what I was going to see in the future. Right. And I have a mentor that always talks to me and tells me, hey, the same sun that melts the ice hardens the clay. And so I look back at that moment, as tragic as it was, as something that prepared me emotionally for what was going forward. And I look back to those two mentors that I mentioned earlier, Major Gibson and Master Sergeant Culverhouse, that having them right there next to me and my other teammates there who are obviously struggling in their own ways, having them there and their experience, who've already experienced loss on the battlefield and doing different things to guide us through that, was incredibly powerful, to take something so negative that I think, we would have been able to take something out of it that could have prepared us where we were going through.
So I didn't realize the actions that he took on that day. That's really special.
There were multiple, right? Matt, I'm just highlighting Matt's
Yeah.
story because I remember it and I tell it, but there were tons of the teachers that were doing things and blockading the doors even while they were being shot so that students could get out, and other classmates that stepped up. But his piece of just taking action and being a leader in that moment. A lot of people can sit there and say they do this, but there were also, unfortunately, classmates that they never moved out of their seat, right? Which is a sad thing to sit and hear.
And I had a somewhat similar experience. After I had been commissioned, I was in my first unit, but I hadn't deployed yet. It was in 05 or 06. We were on a training exercise doing gunnery, Apache gunnery, and we were learning new tactics. And one aircraft flew straight into the ground, like shooting a target. They got target fixation, flew into the ground. Not a combat environment, just training. And I remember thinking, okay, it's real, just the same way you said that. Like, it's real now. Going to be in combat in the next year or two. And these are people I knew who just had this fate. And I often say that it kind of changed, it started to harden me the same way. So the question I have for you is, when you say that it hardened you emotionally, is that positive and negative to some extent? Or do you see it as only positive, what it did for you?
It's a fair question. And I think it probably depends on other people's perspectives. I
Yeah.
view it positively, but other people would probably say, hey, it's a negative attribute. I mean, I can shut some, now it's built upon that, right? Is
Right.
I can shut some things down into some cavities that they lock them down, right? Like, and it doesn't
It's
come
true.
back out, or I'm not going to talk about it, or I'm not going to do this. And I view that as, because of the path that I was on, an important trait.
Yeah.
But in normal civilization, most people look at that as probably a not so good thing to hang on to.
Yeah. No, I would say, like, it's almost necessary for the path you're on until you
Yeah.
exit. And then there are times where it can be challenging for other people to see that in you.
Right. Right.
And just the way you described that, I've never really talked about this on the show, but I was in Paris in 2016 when a lot of the terrorist attacks were happening in 2015 and 16. But in 2016, they had this event on a train. It's portrayed in the movie that I think Clint Eastwood produced, 1517 to Paris, where three Air Force guys are just on R&R cruising into Paris, and there's a gunman on the train, and they rush him. Like, everybody else is just immobile. They don't know what to do. And one of the guys is like, no, I'm just going to go and take him on. So the way you were describing what happened in that classroom really reminded me of somebody saying, hey, you all are safe. I'm going to go ahead and just take a shot at this guy, and I'm not going to die here.
That's
waiting.
right. Well, and that is a central principle that, works in anything. And so what we do now, right? We take a lot of these combat leadership principles and we help develop effective teams and world-class leaders with that. But one of the most important traits from any leader is simply a bias for action, right? And doesn't necessarily matter. It's just have some initiative and boldness in what you're doing, take action on something and kind of figure that out. And it's stuff that works in combat. It works on trains. It works in different areas,
And just before we jump, I want to use that just before we jump into your time in the Marine Corps, as you were talking about now Lieutenant Colonel Gibson and Master Sergeant Culverhouse, if I got that right, Culverhouse.
Mm-hmm.
You were saying that you had kind of like 3.5 years of time with them where it was just kind of like immersive mentorship. Was there anything they did outside the formal structure of a classroom that really stuck with you that you might use today, or that you kind of advise other leaders to do, that you just saw them do, you emulate, or that you found really impactful?
Yeah, there are probably a lot of things that were impactful that don't get talked about on camera, right? But probably the most important thing, number one, it was how much they cared, right? And so I would say that still to date, and it might just because I was just, a punk kid that had an attitude that needed to be adjusted anyways, which is probably a large part of it. But they're still probably the most demanding leaders that I've ever worked for. And what I learned from that was how far I was willing to go for their demands and what they were doing. But I was not only, but really largely willing to do that and try to exceed all of those demands because I knew that it was coming from a place of love. And that's something that I think people have this misconception about the military leadership, right? In that they think, especially Marines, when they think Marine leadership, all they think is boot camp and, oh, you just must scream and yell to motivate your people. And I tell folks, probably the number one thing that I learned in the Marine Corps about leadership is that we lead through love. It's like, I really love my men, and that drives certain actions. And so for those guys, that's what I felt was, because the classroom was such a small portion. I mean, when you're at military school and a senior military college, they have access to you 24/7. And what I learned, and a lot of those guys is like, hey, it's a B billet for them. Like, they're taking some time off. Like, nope, these guys were sleeping in their office multiple nights a week because they were so invested with the young men there. And I think they felt that burden of, these are the next generation of Marine leaders that are going to go to combat. Yeah. We need to make sure that we leave no question that we've done everything we can to train them properly. And I think that they felt that burden at that time from 2003, 2007 timeframe, right? They felt that burden with the growth of our guys. So I think that how demanding they were on us is an important thing, but we were willing to do it because I knew how much they cared about us, and that they were, no matter how sucky it was and the things that they were asking us to do and how tough it may be, they were doing it with the best of our intentions at heart.
Is that something you used with Impact or a talent war group to help people push their teams? Is it like how to be demanding but coming from a place of love? Is there I'm trying to think through like how you might apply that.
No, absolutely. I'd say it's a huge premise. And especially, like I said, with talent war group, working with corporations, different types of corporations in any industry. And then as I've come through, I've done a lot of work in collegiate athletics, and working with different, football teams or baseball teams, softball teams. And the way that I couch that is, there is a difference between leadership and what I call likership. And most people, they kind of operate under this likership model, which is, hey, I'm not going to be too demanding. I really want you to like me, so I'm going to allow some of these things to slide, or because I want you to think that, hey, I'm cool and we can talk through this, and they take easy decisions on their team, thinking that, well, if they like me, I'm going to get performance out of them. And I would submit that leadership, when done properly, one, it can be a very lonely place, right? The people who I am charged with leading, they do not need me to be their friend. Like, they want high standards. They need a leader who knows their stuff, knows who they are and cares about them. And part of that with the leadership model is helping people understand how to know your standards and demand that teams meet or exceed those standards on a daily basis. And that may look different in no matter your industry or where it's going, but the principle remains the same, right? What a football team may have to do in order to prepare for that aligns a lot like the military in our time that we've had, but a financial planning firm, it might look a little bit different how they're going to do it, but that principle is going to remain the same, is how you need to hold your teammates and demand of them for those standards. And so that's kind of how I couch that, and I take that lesson from tech that I have implemented throughout my entire career, but now teach that to other organizations because I think it's a central principle of high performing teams.
Yeah, I love it. So that's a great jumping off point then into what I assume is a pressure cooker when it comes to leadership development, which is the Marine Corps. So you go in, can you take us through to maybe the first unit you're in and the first time you find yourself in combat? Like, what role are you in? Where are you at that time?
Yes. So after finishing our pipeline, right, you graduate, we have already gone through officer candidate school at this time. And then every Marine officer goes through a process. It goes through the basic school in Quantico, Virginia, 6 months long. Doesn't matter your military occupational specialty, whatever your job is going to be in the Marine Corps, every Marine officer goes through the basic school. And it serves its purpose. And then from there, you go to your specialty schools. And so I had gone through TBS and infantry officers course at that time, and was assigned with a number of our classmates to head out to 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines out in Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. And from there, we immediately went into a workup in preparing, and they've changed the name all the time. We do a lot of our training out in California, but you go through these pipelines and kind of checking the box, are you ready for combat type stuff? And so we go through a long exercise out in California after this 6 or 7 month workup. And then we deployed almost immediately out to Afghanistan, into an area where I was at was in Nowzad. So in Helmand province, kind of central southern Helmand in an area called Nowzad, which was awesome and kind of terrible all at the same time. Very, in 2009, for if you remember correctly, like we were surging at that time, right? America made this decision that, hey, we're going to fight 2 wars on 2 fronts. And so we jumped straight in, and we're into these areas that only 1 or 2 American units had been there before us. The Brits were there, kind of in hand grenade range from what we understand and how it was passed to us. And we had taken over, and so it was really it was kind of an isolated, desolate town. It was just the enemy and us. And so it really gave a lot. It was very kinetic in that regards, but the enemy had a lot of freedom of movement for a long time. And because of that, as we go in, not to get into any of the tactics of those things, but there are certain ways that we like to fight, right? Certain formations and doing things. And we had trained that way. We knew that there was going to be an IED threat in Afghanistan. I think that's really the big difference from most people. You sit there and talk to them, is while Iraq had IEDs, they were really good gunfights in Iraq. Afghanistan was kind of the varsity level of IEDs, and they weren't very good at gunfights. And so as we came in, we get dumped into kind of, a larger base. I think we went to Leatherneck or wherever it was the first time. We were only there for a week, getting kind of this intel updates, what's going on, kind of holding pattern before we're going all the way out to, these forward operating bases in the middle of nowhere, to be self-sustaining and operating. And we get this brief and start talking to us, say, hey, oh, by the way, the area that you're going to, it's so heavily riddled with these IEDs that you have to fight in a ranger file, which is, a single file line essentially, right? With an engineer utilizing a metal detector who will kind of sweep your path for you as you go through, which is, there may be worse, but worst case scenario, very, very easy to pin us into a very bad spot and take out a lot of guys. So we get that, and we get a week-long crash course of, hey, here's the unit that you're getting ready to replace. This is what they've figured out. Here are the tactics, techniques, and procedures they've been using. work on this for the next few days, and then you're flying out and head out there. And so we went out to Nowzad, and I was a platoon commander at the time, had a couple of reinforcements. So when I went in, I probably had right around, I think it was 47 Marines underneath my command. I'm 21, 22 years old. And we had just a really interesting time out there where it was us and the enemy, where there's a lot of other areas in there that have populations that you're dealing with that only, I think, amplify the complexity when you have civilians because they blend right in. You don't know who the enemy is. It really creates a lot. And so for us up in Nowzad, it was a really strategic point from where we were. But we had this opportunity where we knew exactly where you go out here, you're going to get in a gunfight every single day. If you go over here, you can talk to a few of these people and kind of some farmers out here. But it was slowly trying to take back some more space up there and kind of garner through. And as we walked out on these patrols, I can still remember we were told was, hey, they're using different Russian mortars or different things, and that was the concept behind the metal detector. We were in 2009 one of the first units to discover what they were actually using were what they called low metal signature pressure plates. And we had been operating for a few weeks, blindly thinking this metal detector is like clearing our path for us. And then we found we had EOD attachments with us that were out there and doing some awesome work. And they started finding some of this mushy ground around us. And this isn't right. And so as they pulled it up, what we were actually finding was they were using these carbon rods out of D-cell batteries to be the igniter. And, these things were hyper simplistic, using a little, think about like a milk jug cut in half, fill that with some homemade explosive, put a wire, 2 pieces of wood, and these 2 carbon rods that are on there. And it only would take about 5 pounds of pressure, and those carbon rods would hit and it would explode. The problem was our metal detectors were not finding these things. And so that became obviously a massive issue for us as you're thinking about maneuvering around. And by and large, everything was foot patrols. In going through, which started okay and really only got worse from there as we started taking ground, and you would walk into these areas where they had, tons of these mines. And as I tell people, the psychological effect was, think about wherever you're sitting, whatever you're doing, listening to this and going, hey, I'm sitting on my couch and you have to walk to the kitchen. You have to walk to the kitchen and there's probably 5 mines between your couch and the kitchen, but you have no idea where they are. And that was every single day that these Marines that would go out there and patrol. And I live in awe of the courage that, our Marines displayed on a daily basis. Really being, I think that there are a couple of intangibles. And I think about that group in particular, Golf Company and 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, I kind of gravitate towards a couple of intangibles that help set them apart from, or what sets these Marines apart from society. And number one was just this dedication to duty. It did not matter, it felt like the first 2 or 3 weeks when we got into country, there was some new negative curveball coming every single day. And that would challenge the mental aspects of what we were doing. But their dedication to duty, where it did not matter what we asked of them, they were willing to sit there and say, this is what we want. And they're coming off of, I think this was this unit that I checked in, it came off 3 or 4 back-to-back combat units or combat deployments to Iraq, turned right back around and back into Nowzad. And so, when I stepped into this platoon, I'm not stepping into a bunch of green guys. Certainly we had a boot drop that came in, and we had some young men there, the vast majority of them being 18, 19 years old. But most of them had at least one, if not multiple heavy combat tours under their belt. And so watching their just dedication to that duty of saying, this is what we do, has always remained impressive to me. And equally as important was their courage. As we're telling them, here's what we need from you to do, or here's what's going to happen. the fear that can easily set in, they were able, and that I think that's what defines the courage. It's not being scared. Anybody who's ever been and really seen combat and seen war knows that being scared is a very real thing. It's that is where courage comes into play, is being able to go and take care and accomplish your mission in the face of that fear. And so seeing their courage was incredible. And most importantly, in their selflessness. They're willing, the amount of guys, like, here we are walking on this minefield that we don't know where we find these things. And I would have to finally just assign it, because my Marines are fighting over who can walk point.
Wow.
Let me go be that guy. So I remain in awe of these young men in what they were able to accomplish every single day through that.
So a couple things there, Joe. That's really super interesting to hear. When you talk about coming to a unit, and I was thinking of this as you talked about kind of when you graduated, when you commissioned, getting to the unit, you're there in 2009. Presumably a lot of these people have been through multiple combat deployments, which you just described. How hard was it for you coming in to be a leader at 21, 22 years old with that setting? Because I'm sure this is something that comes up as you're coaching other people in leadership positions.
Absolutely. I mean, mostly, and that's what a lot of people don't really understand, especially on the officer side of that, is buying every leadership position that I held in the Marine Corps. Most of my team was older than me, right?
And more experienced.
That goes back,
right? I mean, older and more experienced in some of the fundamentals.
So number one, the most important attribute, I think, in leadership, but really in life, and one of the things that we teach, I believe that character matters in leadership, right? Who we are, the values that we stand for, it matters. And if you don't have that wired tight, it might not catch up to you today. It might not catch up to you tomorrow. Eventually it will. And that's a message that, especially our young men in this world need to hear. Like, you need to dial in what your character is. And for me, those formative years were at Virginia Tech, and having those men, like what they did, like they were able to literally and figuratively beat humility into my body, right? And like, you are going to figure this out. And so I think that is the most important thing, of understanding, like, you come in and say, hey, I'm the boss, it's my way, like it's just not going to work. Coming in and saying, hey, now I was prepared. The Marine Corps does an incredible job of preparing our leaders for what they need to have happen. I'm very thankful for my time of, I call it practice, right? Practice at Virginia Tech, where you get to make a lot of mistakes with very little consequences. But those moments prepared me to step in there and say, hey, listen, I have worked my tail off to be technically and tactically proficient. I know my stuff, but I don't have any real world experience. And so you have to have that humility to be able to sit there and listen and lean on the other individuals or the other perspectives or the opinions to kind of be the best way I kind of put it is like velvet steel, right? I want to be soft enough to hear these opinions, to hear these thoughts that are coming in, but I need to be confident enough to be able to say no. Like, I do have some understanding when I like this idea. I like this idea. Hey, I like that idea, but we're not going to implement that today. We're going to take these two things and we're going to go and execute this way. So I think the humility, it played a massive part in being able to step in front of these guys with experience to say, hey, I'm going to do what I can. But doing that is with Marines, like, they don't just open you with welcome arms. I can remember one of the first days, like, I can remember the Marines like, yeah, last platoon commander we had to get shot in the face. And I was like, that was their way. Like, I wasn't one of them yet. Right.
Yeah, for sure, man. So as you're talking about getting into combat, I'd like to ask you about two firsts there. So one being the first time you recall going out with these guys, these Marines, on a patrol, whether it was mundane or not, but then also, given the IED threat, the first time you take a casualty from an IED, if it happened.
Yeah, I did. We had a couple of mundane, initial patrols going through, but the ones that stand out it was actually 4th of July in 2009. And we had a larger mission plan to start, again, the units that were before us just slowly taking up some of this battle space and kind of hung around, that main fob. We were really trying to expand our reach in our kind of presence out there in a lot of areas. And so we were intentionally planning missions to kind of push our boundaries and push into the forward line of enemy troops in different areas. And so we had planned a larger operation with kind of a couple platoons and reinforce them with our heavy weapons guys and going through. And so like anything, no plan survives first contact, right? All these smart people sitting around making plans, and within the first 5 miles, it felt like, of getting in, boom, we blow up a vehicle, a guy gets hurt, hurt minor but hurt nonetheless, and they're in the way, right? And you can't just go around everything because you're on this minefield. So it creates challenges. So it was not off to a good start to begin with, but we decide, hey, let's continue to carry on, and so we pushed up, and I had my platoon in two. They called them armadillos. They were essentially fully up armored 7 tons, which is a large truck, big truck bed type of thing, right? But up armored, having some type of armor around the sides with kind of a window where our heads are at, so we can, lined on both sides. I've got platoon of Marines in there with all the different weapon systems that we have, that if we need to, we can angle that truck and kind of shoot out of it. And we had gone up and just hearing different things, gotten a little, just kind of a couple pot shot, like little engagement going through, pulled into an area where it was pretty heavy and sustained fighting at the time. And I don't know why this other truck decided to move and maneuver around, but I mean, these 7 tons are not highly maneuverable vehicles. So like when I say he needed to turn around, like it's a big, lumbering circle through this thing. And I'm in the gun truck. We're engaged with the enemy at this point, and I hear this massive explosion behind me. And as the commander, like my heart sinks, because I'm sitting here going, half of my platoon is on that vehicle, and so as we kind of move around, all I see is smoke, and there's no vehicle left. And I'm sitting here, time really slows down, where you're trying to process what the heck just happened. And then over the radio, I start to hear a little bit of chatter coming through, and not sure what they hit, something massive, but it blew off the entire front of this armadillo. And most of my Marines in the back, they were alive, but severely concussed. A couple still, knocked out and hanging over the bed. And so now, at 21, I'm trying to figure out, okay, what needs to happen? Who has control of the situation? We had a couple other commanders on some of our weapons platoon commander was out there. And so, hey, who's running this? Are we calling this in? What are we doing? And we were really exposed, just kind of very flat. Now's was a really kind of beautiful place for all the horror that was out there. It was like, it'd be really flat desert, and then these spiky, massive mountains. And we were just, we were in this flat land. And so one of the kind of SOPs was, hey, let's get air on station. I would much prefer helicopters like yourself. But typically, like when we're doing that, we're trying to assess what's going on, is they'll bring in a jet, and we do what's called a show of force, and bring a jet down really low and really fast, just to be like, we're here, so don't mess with us, right? And I can remember we're trying to call this in, we're trying to get control of the situation, figure out who is hurt, how badly they're hurt. Let's get a medevac in here, what we have to do, but let's get some air cover in here and go through it. I remember them coming back and say, hey, we have no U.S. support, no coalition, no U.S. support on station, and it was a French, like,
Mirage.
Yes, let's call it that.
Okay.
It was something like that, whatever the fight, but I'm assuming it was probably a Mirage. And he comes in, and the best recollection I have, like, I need something coming in hot, hard, and fast, like scary. This guy came in like Pepe Le Pew, like he came in so slow. It was like I could see the leather helmet and goggles and like the scarf flowing behind him. He's trying to keep this thing in the air as it just like slowly comes by. And, I've got half a platoon hanging out over this armadillo. Men are injured. I'm like, this is not going to work, like, get this thing out of here and bring something in, bring something serious in. So we had, at that point, it was, let's get this cleaned up, get some of the Marines that need to get out of here, get them out of here, called medevacs in for them. And then, now it doesn't just end. Like, you have to recover this vehicle somehow, right? Like, we don't just leave it there. We have to recover it. And I think that's some of the pieces as we look at this. And I've listened to the show of, as I think about the men that I was fortunate and privileged to lead, one of the things that is different with the kind of the main straight leg infantry units is that it is day on, stay on.
Yeah.
And there is nobody else coming to help you. And so when you get into a mess, you self recover out of that mess, and that's just, we all have our roles and how it goes, and our special operations elements and our special forces elements, they serve a specific purpose in what's going through. But that's one of the things that really differs, is that they have a lot of support in different areas to help them do what they need to do. And when you make a mess like we did on the 4th of July, you have to self-recover out of that mess and limp yourself back, kind of licking your wounds to live and fight another day with that.
God, it's so true. I mean, I've talked maybe just one time on this podcast about one of the ops, not an op. We kind of were doing a recon and security in Afghanistan and came across some destruction and found out, one of the task forces hit this area last night, and the conventional guys, their job was to then go in and make things right on the ground, like remove stuff. And that's just the role, that's special ops is going in and they're out and they're on to the next target, and the conventional folks have to take care of it. And one of the things that you mentioned there, being in the 7-ton, I just interviewed, people will know Christian Holloway, who's a former Marine. He was in the initial invasion, and he talks about getting hit in a 7-ton before it was up armored, like 03, 04, and just how destructive that was with no armor on it. So the way you described it, I think is incredible to hear 5 to 6 years later, what we tried to do to protect people. So did you end up losing people from that, or did they, at least they were no KIAs, they walked away from it to some degree?
No KIAs. As I look back, I mean, we were exposed to so many blasts on that deployment. And probably, as I look back on that, is we probably, that was still a time in the war where it was like, I don't know how to best say it, but we weren't kind of reporting that stuff probably as well as we could have. And some of it is we just didn't know the effects of those things, and not just the blast that you were hitting in vehicles, but most of the guys that I watched, our platoon really loved to be on foot, like much more dangerous. If you stepped on one of those things, they had kind of sadistic. They had it dialed in. They were not planting enough homemade explosive to blow you to pieces. They were doing just enough to rip you in half. But keep you alive, so that your teammates are going to come to you. And now we step on them, it would create a mess. And so, as you walk through that, the bombs that we're dropping, the close air support that you're dropping, the engagements that you're in, just a lot of the blast. And I think that'd be the difference that I look at is we didn't have KIAs, we could have done a much better job of making sure we're taking care of our guys, kind of in getting their heads right. I mean, it was normal, right, for people to have concussions, and you're just right back out. If you're not missing a leg or you're not blown in half, you're not injured. And I think we could have done a better job with that.
That you're kind of referring to the TBI aspect of it, right? Kind of like
which was new, right? Not new, but it just wasn't definitely not widely as reported as it is today, right? In 2009, it was still kind of on the cusp of that, and guys coming out of Iraq are like, you're not going to say anything like that. Like, injured in our world was you were missing a limb or eyesight, things. You were really down, and it was very common for us to take blasts and guys get their bells rung, and you just keep executing.
Oh man. How about, do you recall the first time somebody on foot ended up getting hit? And I'm not trying to have gratuitous violence here. It's more, I'm trying to put myself, if I were a platoon commander and you're on a patrol on foot, and one of these people who you spend all your time with gets something really nasty like that, how do you handle that situation?
Yeah. So actually the first time somebody in my platoon got hit, these are the types of things, right? We talk a lot about with teams that we work with, is leadership is such a privilege, right? But it carries a heavy burden with it. And it doesn't matter if you can try to do the best, like you're going to make decisions and you have to live with them, right? Everything that happens or fails to happen is my responsibility.
Yeah.
But it's very common, the military does a huge or a very successful job at effective small unit leadership. And that is an area that I focus on with every team that I work with. We have a talent work group. Like, that's where I focus in, is I want to develop your small unit leaders, because that is the key to success. And so it's very common for us. I wouldn't go on every single patrol. Every single patrol was not a platoon size, but I need to give my Marines, there's time where I need to be out there leading from the front and doing these types of things. But there's also time where I need to trust my small unit leaders to go be effective and get out there and make their own plans to do these things, trying to building those succession plans with it. And actually, the first time one of my Marines was hit was on a patrol that I wasn't on. And those haunt you for the rest of your life, right? Those are the things that you sit and you wonder, like, hey, would I have made different decisions? Would I have done this? Would anything have changed? Most likely not, right? But it doesn't change the fact that you're going to replay that. But had a squad element that was out there. And again, there were a couple of areas that we knew were more dangerous than the others, but not being able to find a good pathway in doing things. It was a squad size element that was engaged, and they felt like they were being maneuvered on from the side, kind of enveloped from the side. So they split in half, and one unit went around. And as they went around, he was hit. And this guy, man, I loved him. And he is a straight up war fighter. And this was at a time, we talk about a lot of our special operations units have, 18 deltas, and like one of my teammates at Talent Work Group, Josh Johnson, 18 delta. They're very self-sustaining in their world. But in our level, while we would have a corpsman per platoon, like I can't wear him out every single patrol and what's going on. And so at that time, we started. They were training and developing this new course called Combat Lifesaver. And so they started to realize, hey, we need more people out there that understand medical training and being able to help things where it was going. And Paul Schaus had gone through that course, just an awesome war fighter. And it was early on in our deployment, and he got hit and was really mad that he was hit. I can remember the Marines telling us, like, stop screaming at them. He wanted to end the fight, and he was the stories that they were telling me was more upset that he knew his time was over there and wasn't going to get his revenge with it than he was hit. But he was on patrol with one of his best friends, and those blasts, as I said, it hit Paul, but it takes out a lot of the guys that are around it because of the concussion that comes from that. And they had a miserable time trying to get him out, because you're in this little town that these mud huts, and it's 2-3 foot thick walls, but that's the safest place for them to be able to egress out of there than walking through these alleyways that are loaded with IEDs. And so Paul, they had sat there, they'd gotten tourniquets on him, and they're just men carrying their brother over these homes and over these walls and trying to get him out of there, and the pain that they're in, right? As we're getting out. And we had another huge mentor of mine was our company first sergeant, he's actually now retired sergeant major. He is walking across the country with a group called the Long Road in order to raise money to bring home our fallen warriors from different wars and things. But he had set up a lot of combat experience in his regard, and he was running a lot of our combat casualty patrols in that area. And so he had set that up and organized it. And because of one of the life-saving things that we had up in Nowzad that other areas did not, was we had a shock trauma platoon that was embedded with us. And they had a specialized up-armored, think ambulance, right? Or up-armored surgeons or surgery center that I forget the statistic, Ryan. It was something like guys who were hit up in our area that had a shock trauma platoon, which is the highest level of care they can get, right? Because we talk about the golden hour when somebody gets hit. They talk about the golden hour of getting them to treatment. Next echelon of treatment within that hour increases their survivability. Having that shock trauma platoon there, they were able to get that level of treatment within 10, 15 minutes oftentimes. And so our survivability rate for IEDs was, I think it was up over 75, 80%, where it was significantly lower in areas that did not have that shock trauma platoon. So having guys like that cared about you, that put the right plans in place for you, they were able to get him out and get him to treatment. But that combat life-saving piece is, here's a young man who's going through a pretty obviously a traumatic event. He's in rough shape, and he's still able to sit there and tell the medics, "Hey, this is what's happened. Here's how I need blood now. I've lost this much blood. Do this." And so he's able to aid them in that process. Just incredible men in the face of such adversity.
And it's also, you're able to treat yourself in a lot of ways, right? Like you can apply your own tourniquet, which is part of it. And a lot of these skills that maybe weren't taught to individuals. So that's great to hear. And I know, as you had mentioned, that your second deployment, I don't want to leave the first just yet, but in your second, you mentioned that you were an XO. Mm-hmm. So what I was hoping to do was, I don't think people understand what an XO is if you're not in the military. So I was hoping you could kind of explain that, and then maybe share one or two of the more difficult missions or operations you found yourself on, whether that was as a platoon commander or as an XO. I just want people to have some context there.
Yeah. So the company executive officer is the second in command of a company, right? So you've got the company commander who's leading that, and that'll rough up into 250 people typically by TO, and that's all changing now with what they're doing. But in our area, we were so heavily reinforced. The second deployment was a little bit farther south in an area in Nawa, and in our battalion covered the Marja area, Nawa area, and because of where we were, they gave us a lot of battle space. We ended up having like 600 guys with all the different reinforcements in our company. And so my company commander has a lot of battle space that he's got to get around to, and friction points that he's watching and seeing. So he is constantly out in a lot of these different areas. The company executive officer, he runs a lot of the day-to-day operations. Second in command going through that is more so making sure all of the planning is proper, make sure all, setting everything up for success, making sure that all the logistics, working closely with some of our command team there to make sure all the logistic elements are right, all the planning is right, all the operations are right, working through this stuff to really keep the company running. That does a lot of that role. In combat, I was exposed to some pretty awesome pieces with that a young company executive officer would not typically be engaged in, because my company commander had to be out so often. I was the man left there running this patrol base, which was a huge focal point for the RC South Command. And so every week we'd have a visit from regimental and the commanding general coming through there to where, hey, my boss isn't here to brief these guys. So it's just, again, young Lieutenant Mac sitting here with these two full-bird colonels and general asking questions about things. So it really honed on that aspect of you need to know your stuff, but you have to prepare, right? And you have to prepare. And so very similar, I believe we're a product of our experiences, but I am a product of the people who have poured into me. And I have been fortunate my entire career to be surrounded by amazing leaders. And some of those early elements and principles that I talked about at Virginia Tech, those carried through to my experience with the Marine Corps, or in combat, and going through with some of the leaders that I was faced, and how they would be demanding, but they'd also care about me. And so they'd push me. And if they knew that, hey, I'm starting to get in some deeper water here that I might not really fully know the answer, like they were really caring about, hey, they would teach me and they would go through. And so they would walk that line of when they needed to be demanding and say, hey, no more, or do this, or where this expectation is. And at the same time, be very fair with me, right? They would ask me, and sometimes they'd be shocked that I knew the answer and was prepared. And sometimes when I didn't, they'd be like, okay, like, let me help you understand this a little bit, right? So that experience as an XO really shaped me, because it was significantly larger than the normal scope of responsibility that an XO would have. Yeah. Just given the area of responsibility that we had in going through that.
Yeah. So with that context, as you look back at the time where you were deployed, because I know you go forward and you command at Parris Island. So from the time you're deployed there, what's one or two of the tougher either leadership development moments that you experienced, or just pure danger, worried about your guys, that you recall or that you think back on often?
Yeah. Definitely the first deployment, right, as a platoon commander, we ended up doing to set the state, going a little bit farther south into an area called Dahana's Pass. There were two mountain passes, or two mountains that created this little pass that was a really an avenue for the enemy to come from the south. And so they wanted to go, seize this. And no coalition forces had ever been into that area, so we weren't sure what we were going to expect. And so we actually had a very large company-sized assault on this town in 2009, where we had a heliborne assault from the south and a ground assault from the north. And we had a recon element up in the mountains there that we inserted the night before. All the intel was, hey, this is going to be a bloodbath. You go down there. It's really not going to work well. What's going to happen? We expect it to be heavily fortified. So myself and the weapons platoon commander was an awesome Marine officer, just exemplary Marine officer of everything you'd expect him to be. We led the ground assault from the north coming through, and the company commander and a couple others are on the heliborne assault from the south. And out of the gate, again, going back to no plan survives first contact, we had a recon element that was in the mountain pass, and immediately, I don't know what the intel was, why they did that, but you can be familiar with, we had the attack helicopters leading the assault in, and the recon element was marking their position with an infrared laser, essentially. And apparently they were briefed that the enemy would have one of those. And so they lit off on 2 rockets and gun runs right on the position of our recon element there, which thankfully, they sucked rock face in there, got as small as they could. And we did not lose anybody in that. But it starts things off on a massive, kind of a massive adversity right out of the gate.
Can I pause you real quick, Joe? Was there any discussion of like, hey, do we just cancel this now? Do we abort because we almost had fratricide?
No, it was at least from what I can remember, it was the chaos of everybody trying to get a hold. And there was something with the communication that when they came into the AO, they didn't get onto the right freak. And so they weren't talking with our FAC. They weren't doing these things. And so it was a big blunder that I put on the air side. But big blunder coming into that. But I think the focus was just get them to stop, because they were already, the helicopters that our men were on were already behind them, taking fire. And so they needed to get them on the ground, get those Marines out of there and get out of the AO. So our focus turned to get the ground element down there as fast as possible, but get those helos on the deck and start working through that.
Wow. Okay, so that's just like the kickoff here.
That's just,
and it's daytime, right? Am I wrong on that, Joe? This is all daytime, or you?
No, that was, yeah. We mostly operated in the middle of the night, which as you sit there and go through like these cool pictures of that people see nowadays of all the the support I give our teammates at TWG a hard time with Mike and Josh, all the support they had in the SEAL teams and in the Special Force. Like no. These Marines, I had a monocular NVG device that's hanging from Vietnam, hanging off my head, that you're trying to navigate through this minefield going through. And our men, they were the epitome. Again, why they're my heroes is they were the epitome of doing so much with so little. And so, we went in there in that kickoff and fought for a few days, weeks. And then the company pulled out of there and they left me and my platoon down in there. And so more of maybe like what people are familiar with, we had a huge clearing. I cleared west. I think I cleared the west side of the town, and my fellow platoon commander and his platoon, they cleared the east side of the town, which was very not what we were traditionally doing in Afghanistan, because there weren't that many like communities in that area. But when we got down there, we had to go door by door, house by house, and clear that. We felt very prepared for that. That was done during the daytime, and just clearing through this whole thing and constant fighting throughout that. You don't forget the sounds of like a recoilless rifle going off and hearing these things and kind of that movement there. But cleared through that town, and then after that kind of settled, my platoon was left there and to hold. And so they reinforced with us more. And I ended there again at 21-22, ended there with 109 Marines and sailors, some of America's greatest down there, that was under my command in Dahana there in that pass. And again, remain in awe from what they were able to do. And so from the fear, I think there were a number of things when we got down there. We're down there, we're alone and unafraid, right? On our own. That's the piece when I say that is like what the pressure that you have as a commander in that is nobody is coming. Right? Like I have air support and I would have air support almost on a daily basis out there, but nobody can get to me because of, these IED fields. The headquarters is 5 miles to the north. They don't have a fast way to be able to get to us. So there is no, what we call a quick reaction force on anything that we're doing. It is all internal. So I either know how to do those things. I have either prepared properly and know how to do that internally, or I have not. Right. And so I take that very, very seriously of making sure that we were prepared for those moments. And our men just did some incredible, incredible selfless things there throughout that. But when we were setting up, I can remember in setting up, meaning we're kind of fortifying this area that we've now come into. We hit a lucky shot, right? I had a group of engineers that were building kind of another outpost for us, and we use what's called HESCO, essentially just kind of quick fill walls. You can build like a big square and you can fill them with dirt, and it becomes a pretty good protection for kind of our walls and protect you from round bullets or whatever explosions. And a lucky shot, they were building that. They were all kind of sitting there taking a chow break. And the enemy would routinely launch mortars at us. They, hit one and went right through the roof and detonated right in the center of, I had 5 engineers that were sitting in this kind of, call it probably a 10 by 10 HESCO area. That as that explosion hit, certainly, the shrapnel exploded, caused some catastrophic injuries to some of the Marines that were in there, but the concussion and the blast somehow made even the rounds on their vests start detonating. And so as they're sitting next to each other, it's shooting each other from their vest. And so now again, nobody sits there and, no one sits there and says, "Hey, sir, it's okay, I got this," right? Like, you're the senior man on the ground. The number one thing that Marines will go to the gates of hell and back for you if they feel confident that you have a plan to take care of them. Right. I think that's probably one of the most important aspects that we come out of in our mission planning is, hey, if something goes wrong, here's what I'm going to do to take care of you.
Yeah.
And so as the senior man on the ground, when that happens, everybody's sitting there and they look at you and it's, okay, what are you going to do? Right. What are you doing now? We've got a mass casualty incident about a mile and a half away, a mile and a half to our south. They're telling us what's going on. Of course, there's a lot of issues there. They have to self-treat what's going on while we try to figure out how to get them out of there, and comms go down. Right. So now, if it's not hard enough to do this, now our comms go down. Now I go completely blind I do not understand. I don't know if they're being maneuvered on by the enemy. I don't know. Hey, do we have anybody that can walk? Are we missing limbs? Where are we? And so you immediately, you go into your immediate action drills of how are you taking care of this? And again, leaning on your men. Like I had such, and I keep saying it because I don't use it lightly. Like my men are my heroes, because when I face those types of moments, I'm able to look at guys that I trust and say, I need you to go do this. Like I can give them a vague intent and they can sit there and say, got it, sir. And boom, they're off. And they grab 3, 4, 5 Marines. They're in a truck and they're immediately going down to these guys, regardless of the situation, to make sure they can take care of them. And so I think back of that moment as a pretty pivotal time. Is you can, and we were able to save all of them. We did not, none of them were KIA, all WIA, but some pretty severe wounds. We were able to get them back up to our position where we were able to treat them a little bit better while we waited on their medevac. And I cannot say enough good things about the PJs that constantly, I hated calling them in, but they responded every single time, and it did not matter. I mean, to put a helo down in what we'd call an active minefield, that takes a lot of courage and trust to the guys on the ground that we have swept this area, and we're not gonna compound an already terrible situation, right? But the PJs would come in and they could take care of our men so well. And so I can't say enough good things about them as how they kind of came through and how we worked together with that.
You mentioned the company command time at Parris Island and how formative it was. And I think as we talk about what comes next for you, it sounds like that's a pretty important moment in your leadership development, even after talking about what we just did with this time in the field in combat. So could you share a little bit about what you learned leading in that atmosphere as a
Yeah,
commander?
and I can kind of step into that because I'd say that commanding at Parris Island and leading Marine Corps drill instructors was an incredibly um, developmental time for me as a leader, which is interesting because you think, oh, combat would be that, but it was a different set. But probably one of the most important lessons that I learned over, I mean, we talked about being demanding, kind of the leadership versus likership, but it was also about the importance of relationships and how far that takes you, not just in leadership or in business, but in life, right? Can you effectively build relationships? And I say I take that back because in that same area, we got moved out. We were in it when we in Afghanistan. We had taken over this compound, large compound, and relatively safe that we were operating out of. And I'm just the lowly commander. I get told what to do, right? And in comes the senior commanders, the battalion commanders, and for whatever reason, that gave the impression that we were occupying. So they moved us out of this fortified, building, and they put us in the middle of a mountain pass in GP tents, which is just a tent. Like
Yeah.
GP just sounds cool in the military. It's just a tent, right? Big, tent. And you don't have to read very far in Afghan history to realize the most deadly place in Afghan history in the wars is in the middle of a mountain pass. So I wasn't too happy with that decision, especially because there wasn't really a justification for it. And it quickly became this fishbowl. But at that time, they were trying to push this integrated forces thing. And so I was stuck because we don't get the varsity level Afghan National Army and Afghan uniform police. We get the scrubs off the street that they put a uniform on and came to us. And for those that don't know, and nor should they, like the ANA, I had some decent respect for. They were pretty good, but the Afghan uniform police, they hated each other. It was like the Bloods and the Crips. And so now I'm stuck. Now I'm living in the middle of a mountain pass in a tent. And now I'm kind of living in these quarters between two local nationals that hate each other. And I have to figure out how to work with these people and employ them and deploy them on these patrols that we're doing. But over time, they don't all like you, but over time you learn to build some relationships with there were some really, really good commandos in those units that wanted to learn and wanted to do things. And I talk about relationships because it's funny now, but it really wasn't funny when you were the guy on the ground. Was not once, but twice we had a couple of flaring of issues that kind of came up. And flaring of issues that came up, there was the Afghan National Army soldier got hurt on a patrol that we were doing, and none of them took it well. And I was like, I need to go talk to the commander, like, let's figure out what's going on. Cause it was a disaster how they were operating. They would just shoot RPGs at anything that moved. It was kind of crazy. But as I walked down, there was one of the soldiers that was on post and just staring through my soul. And I had everywhere you went, I kind of had like an element of Marines that were around me. And so I just looked at one of them. And I said, if he moves, and as I walked by, he clicked off safe on his weapon. And so as I told my Marine, I said, if he moves, you need to kill him. And we didn't take two more steps. And now I've got, my Marine and this guy are gun up on gun up, screaming at each other. All of the ANA soldiers pour out of their little holes, all of their guns up. My Marines immediately turn from outboard security, inboard security. I get tackled to the ground. Everybody, different languages screaming at everybody. And I kind of get up and I'm like, this is not good. We have a problem. It's that situation that I really felt, hey, if one round went off,
Oh yeah,
everybody's dying here. And now, young commander has created an international incident. So and I say that because of the lesson that I learned there it was the power of relationships. Of the commander was kind of weak, and he was He wasn't happy and he was not going to diffuse the situation, but we had built credibility with one guy named Mo. And there were, I don't know how many machine guns in our faces. The Marines are going nuts. And I just asked Mo, I said, Mo, tell them to put their guns down. Tell them to put their guns down. But he had respected our Marines so well that he diffused the situation. And so it was one of those things that I think, going back to the humility, is in the relationships, that I don't need to solve this problem. Like, I was okay with Mo being the guy that figured this out. My goal was, let's not create this international incident. And so being able to leverage other people to do that, and knowing those relationships can really help. If you're building the right relationships, can help. And that's something that I took to Parris Island. I think my takeaway there were the drill instructors. That is a very challenging school that they go through. It's a incredibly demanding duty station. And I felt that a lot of the officers at Parris Island, my opinion, might not be popular, I thought they were pretty weak. There was a core group of some good commanders that were there, but there were a lot of them that really were not effective. And it has the way that it's structured is almost like, hey, the drill instructors, they're there to do a job, and the officers are put in place to try to get them in trouble or not allow them to do those things, right? And so it immediately creates this rift in the relationship. And so to be able to build influence, which that's what leadership is, good or bad, it's influence. In order to build influence with that, the credibility, the combat awards on your chest, whatever you've done, it doesn't matter. You have to find a way to build relationships with the different leaders that are there. And going back to not always being the one that has to solve the problem. Sometimes it's just manage the process, right? You watch these guys and they take different areas over, and you're aware, like in the military, we change commanders like every 2 years in different areas. It's a forced thing. It's normal. But everybody kind of feels like, hey, I need to go and put my stamp on this. Parris Island is an area that's been a machine that's been running one way for decades. Like, just manage the process effectively, make the right decisions with your team's best interest at heart, and build relationships with these men. And they start to realize that, hey, I will be demanding. I will hold them accountable to the standards, but I'm not there to limit their ability to do their job effectively. We're there to protect our reputations and do those things. So I took that from some of those experiences in Afghanistan to Parris Island. Was probably the biggest thing, was building relationships not just within your unit, but cross-functionally, to be able to get things done and accomplish a mission in the best manner possible.
Was that experience, in your mind, was it, hey, I'd rather be commanding in combat and I got stuck here at Parris Island? How did you look at that at that time?
It was natural. I mean, there's a whole longer story on how I ended up there, but it's a natural rotation in the officer pipeline in the Straight Lakes. So once I don't have a choice. Like, they're taking me out of that unit and sending me to what we call a B billet. And so there's a different story on how I ended up there, but it worked out really, really well. It was not a break. It's an incredibly demanding duty station, but again, that it was like a leadership factory, because these guys you're surrounded by hyper alpha males, all trying to go 100 miles an hour. And your job is to keep them within kind of this left and right lateral limit, going in this direction. And you would always have a few that start straying out this way or straying out this way. And you get put in these. That's why leaders exist, right? For these gray areas. It's not the black and white. We exist to make decisions. And so when guys would do something that were a little bit against the rules, it's, how are you going to handle that? Right? Is that something you need to handle internally? Is it getting blasted up to the top? And these guys are always walking the line. So in hindsight, like, yeah, you wanted to be back with the guys, you wanted to be back in the fight. But in hindsight, a lot of that, the opportunities that I had at Parris Island, I was able to take that kind of that accelerated growth that you get from combat and put it into a place that's training and mentoring the people that are responsible for building the next generation of warriors.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's that's the difference that you see is like when you're in those types of combat elements in a normal unit, like not every Marine unit that goes into a combat zone sees that type of combat or has those types of experience where it's every day. And there is nobody else pulling security, right? It is day on. You went out and you patrolled and you come back and you're pulling your own security, right? Yeah. Like it is day on, stay on. And so it accelerates a lot of that growth. And I felt that at the time I was able to take that to Parris Island and build relationships with incredible Marines that were not all infantry Marines. They come from every MOS that's out there.
Where does the idea for impact come in for kind of leadership development for you?
It was, at Parris Island, as I was looking at this of the experience that I had in the Marine Corps, and I looked at just the backgrounds that all of my Marines came from, right, and what they did, and how that type of adversity that you can face, right, that shared adversity is what builds just high performing teams, and it gives people the opportunity to lead. And so I looked at all those backgrounds, and then at Parris Island, it just became much more of a training pipeline, right? So I kind of went full circle, having gone through the military school route and the officer route. I got to close that loop with seeing the enlisted side of that and building that through. And so watching that, it's like there is a formula, a very easy formula for how to take somebody from boy to man, right, and give them this successive training plan that makes them highly effective in anything that they're doing. And so as I was looking at what was next for me, I made that decision at the time to, hey, I'm going to go ahead and separate. And I wanted to take these lessons learned and pass them on. Everybody does it differently. I totally respect people who did their time in service and they get out and they don't really ever talk about it, or they don't want to go and do these types of, that's great, right? They want to blend back into society, perfectly fine. Admittedly, I'm not a fan of kind of the chest thumpers that get out and it's like the look at me, look what I did, and try to profit off of their time for their own benefit. But I think there's a lot of things that our veterans can offer society. And I look at those experiences that I've had. I believe the Lord put me through those for a reason. And my responsibility is to be a good steward of those experiences and the opportunities that He's provided for me. And so as I look at that, as I've tried to build a platform for not just me, but the amazing people that I've been surrounded with, my Marines that I've worked with, the different people that I've engaged with, can I build a platform that can allow them to get out and do the same thing and impact the lives of other people? And so we built that with a couple of Marines that I've come across with in my time, and went to business school at North Carolina, where I was able to tie that loop of getting that business knowledge, seeing how these people operate at high levels at different things. And so it just gave me different exposure. And through that, we were able to build this process and this platform that was eventually, noticed and recognized by my now teammates at Talent War Group that recently just acquired Impact a few months ago.
Congrats on that, for sure. I mean, I'm sure people like Mike Sarraille and Josh Johnson and folks are not going to take anything that comes along. So I'm sure the homework that went into it and what you bring is just super valuable. So huge congrats. And I would ask, there's a couple things that we talked about here that I'm always curious how to translate some of these leadership experiences from the military into the corporate sector where I live. And a few of those, you talked about small units, and I feel like almost anywhere you go, it's a small unit. It doesn't matter kind of like what environment you're in corporate America, but it's small teams of people that make the decisions and have to implement intent. But you talked about two things in particular that I wanted to touch on, and I'm just curious how you approach these. One is shared adversity, which is you just get in spades in the military, and I don't know how you quite replicate that in corporate sector. And the other is this idea, as you talked about, like you got to Hawaii, you immediately go into a train up. You train on these small unit tactics, response drills, and you can implement them when you're in combat. In the corporate sector, nobody leaves to go into training. Like you don't have teams that rotate out and go to training and then can come back to the day-to-day, the combat, the operations of the work. So I'm curious how you approach that with through leadership development for people, the adversity, shared adversity, and that lack of a training pipeline to get people aligned?
Sure. It's a great question. And, you hit on why I'm so passionate about the small unit leadership is, again, my experience of what I was able to sit there and see and do, right? From, I'm not commanding in Afghanistan. There's a two-star general that's commanding Afghanistan, but he's only able to leave all the multiple layers down from him. And I've got my own, little battle space that I'm responsible for, and I'm making all these decisions. He can only do that because he trusts all of these layers of leadership underneath of you. And so, my goal with that is, I think a lot of these companies that are out there, everybody focuses on, a lot of the executives and who are the top leaders. And I view it as, it's important to have their buy-in, right? It's important to have their buy-in, to understand their culture for what's happening. But if you really want to move the needle, we have to turn this. Most corporate organizations, or heck, even a lot of the sports teams that I work with, it's really like this leader follower network, right?
Yep.
And there's a few key people up there, and everybody else underneath of them, they're waiting to be told what to do. And the military is the complete inverse, right? Is we have an active leadership network at all layer through there. And so my goal is to get in there, and how I kind of navigate through that is turn these passive followers into active leaders by helping them think about some of the things that we lean on, right? We talked about having a bias for action. We talked about boldness and initiative, but some of it can just be simple communication of, I've met a lot of awesome people that in different organizations all around the country, they're not trying to be bad. What they are, they're ill-equipped in some of these areas. They want more. But what you end up having is their leader who's responsible for them has never been fully and effectively trained on how to delegate and push things to the lower level. And conversely, you don't have active leaders underneath of them seeking responsibility. They're not preparing themselves for increased responsibility. The organization's not preparing them for increased responsibility. They just wait until, Tammy or Eric in accounting move on to somewhere else, and now you get promoted into it, right? Well, hey, Ryan's this really good leader. He does such a good job in his area. We'll just bump him up to this. So they do, and then they're upset because Ryan's not performing at the level that he thought he was going to. Well, they've never done anything to pour into him. And so I'm a big believer in, you can't pour into others from an empty cup, right? And so to kind of go backwards into your question is, I think that in going back all the way back to Virginia Tech, those commanders told me that training is everything and everything is training. And so how we support that and support teams is, you're right. They're not pulling people out and just, hey, we're not going to work for a month. We're just going to go train for a month. Like, not realistic in that world. We at Talent War Group, we help fill that void, right? I get your understanding of your culture. I know that the phrases that you try to use, that you are trying to instill. And then as we build that trust and relationship, they leverage us in our training platforms to come in and be that training for their small unit leaders. Now let's pour into these small unit leaders and start to help them learn those elements that we just talked about, but start preparing them for increased responsibility before we need them to move up and fill those roles and those vacancies within our team, right?
Yeah.
We just happen to do so through our various experiential training services. And so because we believe that shared adversity is how you build high performing teams and highly effective leaders, we create those elements. And it might look a little bit different. We mitigate a lot of the risk. When I work with a Division I football team, I can do a whole lot more hyper physical activities with those guys because they are incredible physical specimens. But some of the other organizations I go to, we might not, do it that same way, but we're going to put them through some of our leadership reaction courses, right? It's a very similar way that we trained in the military, but we've built them out through TWG to take them outside of that kind of classroom setting. Because while we will do workshops or things like that with an organization, that's what they're familiar with. But data will show us, like, over time, we only retain about 5% of what we learn in the classroom. Well, we can accelerate that growth by putting you through some type of challenging experiential training program where you're able to sit there, and it doesn't matter the problem that you're going to solve. What we assess people on is their ability to assess a situation, right? communicate and collaborate with my teammates, make a decision, communicate that decision, and then execute. So everything that we do, and we do it through a variety of different services, and we try to get people outside of that classroom and walking through more of these kind of challenging leadership reaction courses. We're able to do that and kind of deliver that sense of shared adversity. And the things that come out of it are always powerful, because it's like, you know what? Ryan and I have never really gotten along. He's really kind of quiet. We just kind of stay away. He's a great guy, but we just don't talk that much. Well, when push came to shove in a classroom, you're not going to get that. But when we're sitting there trying to figure out a problem, Ryan had all these great ideas. Ryan is seeing these things at a different level. What we just created by doing that shared adversity is now we've brought your team together, because as they start to work and solve the company and the organization's complex problems at the lowest level possible, I now can sit there and be like, no, I just worked with Ryan. I know Ryan's got an idea on this. I'm going to go talk to him about X, Y, and Z. And so we start to breed that team ability into organizations and bring that out there to them. We're not building SEALs. We're not building Marines. We're building thinkers. We're building active leaders at these networks to help them use their brains and solve the problems at the lowest level possible.
Yeah, I love that. Just for people listening, that was not a setup. Those were two original questions. I think you crushed them, man. That was really interesting to hear. I'll get you out of here shortly, Joe. I know I've taken up a lot of your time. Just one more question on the leadership side of things. As you've worked maybe less with athletic teams, but more on the corporate side, or vets coming in, out of the military and into the corporate environment, what do you see as one or two of the bigger challenges that they end up facing that you really have to work through with them to get them to be better leaders in the corporate world?
Vets in particular, or any corporate leader?
I guess the training programs you do, if it's with vets or people who don't have a military background, either one, what do you end up seeing as more of the challenge, the one or two things that you really have to spend a lot of time working on to get them kind of to the next level as an active leader, as you described?
Sure. Yeah. One of the most important pieces, I mean, there's a lot that would go into it, but I believe one of the most important characteristics of high performing teams is they hold each other accountable, right? And we see that in the military. We hold each other accountable in different areas to the standard of what's going to happen. And it's just bred into us through all of the units and the training that we have in the military, of a clear understanding of what the standards are. But from the leadership perspective, it's helping them understand that accountability has this like negative connotation to it. Like, hey, if I've got to go yell at my teammate, or I've got to just go back to what I said, like, we lead through love. Make no doubt about it. The Marine Corps is we breed violent individuals, right? So they can be a little bit more aggressive in how we do it, but we still lead through love. And part of that is I try to flip their lens, and I help them understand that, going back to the likership or leadership piece, well, there's a standard that's here. And the standard that we walk past as a leader, that is the standard that we now set. And I want you to flip that lens of, rather than, well, if I hold my teammate accountable, they're not going to like me, or they're going to react this way, or we already have a little rocky relationship, so I don't want to engulf that in flames and make that even worse. I try to get them to flip their lens to help them understand that if you do not hold your teammates accountable, you are failing them, right? Our job as a leader is to create and build leaders. And so we have got to hold and demand our teammates reach and exceed those standards. You do that through accountability. And so it does not matter the team, the organization, where we're going. That will be a mainstay of a constant principle that will always come out as a kind of a challenge that people have is how do I hold somebody accountable? And most of them will agree that they agree that, yep, we need to hold people accountable. It's a catchphrase for a lot of people. The challenge is they don't know how to do it without it turning into some massive confrontation. And so we walk leaders through that scenario of helping them understand, when you create standards and hold your teams to that, it pulls the personal out of it. Right now, we've already slapped the table. We said, this is who we are. Like, this is what we do. So I'm not coming at you and telling you that, hey, use an example. a standard is we respond to all correspondence via email, phone call, text message, whatever. We respond to all correspondence within the team or within clients within 24 hours. If I email you and you don't respond to me and it takes 3 days to get back to me, I need to confront you about that. If that's a standard of ours, I'm holding you to the standard, not, hey, what took you so long to get back to me? Right. Yeah. And now that's a personal thing. Well, you're like, 3 days is well within your limit of, I thought I responded to you in time and I need you to be a whole lot faster. And when we create effective standards and they're clear, they're concise, and they're easily understood, now I can hold my teammates to those standards.
Love it. Okay, perfect. So just getting you out, there's 2 questions I ask everybody. And one of them is there anything you carried with you into combat that had sentimental value, a good luck charm, or something that someone gave you that you wanted to have on you?
I did not carry anything consistently on my body. I did have a cloth American flag, it's actually embroidered American flag that I took on all the deployments that I had with me. But it wasn't on my body. It came with me in my ruck everywhere I went, and I hung it in every place that I stopped at.
Where is that now?
It's in the office on the other side over here.
Awesome.
It's out for sure.
Awesome. Okay. And then question I try to ask everybody, as you kind of look back at this time, leading troops in combat and the sacrifice and being out on your own, the uncertainty, dealing with ambiguity, the loss. When you look back on that, would you go back and do it again?
Oh, there's no doubt I would do it again. No doubt I would do it again. You know, as I said, we are a product of our experiences. I believe that the experiences I had were pretty rare. Like, you can't replicate those. And as tough as they were, right, that's the hardening of the process that I think it is prepared for. I don't know what the future holds, right? But I believe that I've gone through these experiences for a reason, that my men have gone through those experiences for a reason. And, you know, we are hardened and prepared for what the future holds. And I think those experiences have done that for us. And so I would absolutely go back and do that again.
And then I'm going to throw one more at you just because we've had Mike and Josh on the show, right? So I'm trying to imagine a SEAL DevGru guy, an 18 Delta medic SF guy, a Marine in the office. I'm sure you got plenty of others. How ridiculous is some of the banter, the interbranch banter between y'all in the office?
Yeah, I say, you know, Mike says all the time, you know, about the SEAL piece. I like to remind everybody, Mike was a Marine before he was a SEAL, right? So right. I like to remind everybody. And so the banter is awesome, but I'll tell you, like, that is what makes, not in all the military units are that way. That is what makes the teams fun.
Yeah.
Is when you can get around high performing people, like high performing people that know how to get stuff done every single day and make a difference in the lives of other people, but have fun doing it. And so that's what made it an easy scene. I mean, I'm the dumbest person in the room, make no mistake about it, in that group. There's a pretty impressive team there. And that was the beauty of kind of through that acquisition and the merger, is I really believe that the talent that those guys have, we can go farther and faster together. But it does not mean we're gonna do that without ribbing Josh for being in the Army.
I love it. All right, Joe, thanks so much for the time, man. We'll have links so people can find you and Talent War Group, obviously. And I wish you the best of luck, man. Congrats on the acquisition and what you have ahead of you.
Thank you very much for having me and allowing me to share the story of these guys and the courageous and heroic men that they were.
I hope you enjoyed this combat story. Let's jump into some listener comments. We got one on YouTube that's from the Chris Tonto Peranto interview, and it's from Wes Cochran. And in fact, we've got 3 comments today. This first one for Tonto. It says, "Best one yet, Ryan. Great job. The more I watch your videos, the more I realize the great learning points through all of your interviewees are about perseverance, self-awareness, maturity, and living and learning from the experience. Thanks." And I wanted to call this one out in particular because after 87 of these now, I'm realizing that's also a common thread throughout all of these. has to do with people who can overcome so much and how they learn from that. So I often use these same words, Wes, to describe what we're doing on Combat Stories. So I just thought it was really interesting to see you call out the same. The next comment is also on YouTube. It's from the Enrique Rick Prado interview, and it's from F. Ryan, which had me a little bit worried at first when I saw that, but it says, just found Fugit's channel. 2 quick ones. 1, the low-key, very subdued interview style is such a refreshing change, regardless of topic, and it truly is the best way to demonstrate your respect for the interviewee and the viewer, for that matter. And 2, it never ceases to make me smile when covert operators, military or civilian, describe their circumstances or assignments as cool. It's easy to forget they weren't born a case officer or ops, because by the time we see them, they so inhabit that persona. But the truth is, most of these guys have the same cool barometer as the rest of us. It's just they've earned the responsibility of living it. And I think that's really an interesting way to look at it, because a lot of us get into this because we think it's cool. You've heard so many of us talk about the movies that influenced us or books. And there are moments when you're doing these ops and if you have the professional maturity to pause for a moment and think about what you're doing, you realize this is the kind of thing I signed up for. Whether you're running around with a briefcase full of money, or you're about to pull the trigger on a missile shot, or you're looking through a scope on an objective. I would completely agree with you there. So thank you for leaving that. And then the last one, also on the Enrique Rick Prado interview, and this is from Mr. Miller. It says, growing up watching Bourne, Bond, and Mission Impossible, I never dreamed to hear the men these films are based off of be interviewed. Well done. Thank you. And here I would just say, part of the reason I really wanted to do Combat Story to begin with was when I was at the agency, they do such a good job, as many of y'all have heard me say, of sharing experiences, the oral history of what we went through, and the stories are incredible, and so many of them are never told. But if you can think of some of the movies out there that depict these real world events, like Argo, for instance, is a great one. You know, a real event going into an insane place and getting people out. That's the kind of thing that happens all the time in the agency and in that world that many never hear of. So I just feel privileged to have brought at least some of those to light. And Rick Prado's book, Black Ops, does so much of that. So thank you for leaving that. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to these, leaving this great feedback. Love reading it and interacting with you all. Thanks, and stay safe.